Hey, what's up? My name is Matt Valliere. I play drums in the band One Time Mountain. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I like to set up our backing tracks. These are tracks that play behind us when we play out live, and that would be something like strings or sound effects, etc. Alright, let's start by opening up a DAW. I use Reaper, but you can pretty much use anything you want. Most of the methods in this video should work with most software. Alright, so you're going to need a few sound files. You're going to need a click track, which syncs up with the backing track that you're going to use to keep you in time. You're going to need a music track, which is the backing track. And this part's optional, but it really does help if you use cues. So basically, it's just a verbal recording saying where you are in the song, verse 1, verse 2, choruses, etc. Just so you know where you are in the song. You can even include the song name. I'm not going to go over how to prep these files in this video, but basically you open up a session, put your backing tracks in there, whether it's written by you or it's something downloaded from somewhere. And basically you want to bounce out all of those individual tracks, group all your music together, all the backing tracks, so that that exports as one file, and then clicks and the cues as separate files. So in the end, we have these 3 files to work with in this case. Okay, so let's select all of our files and drag them in on separate tracks. Once they're loaded in, you want to name these tracks accordingly. So click, cues, samples being the music track that you're going to send out to the audience. Once that's done, let's save the project. I'll call this Live Mix. I like to color code my tracks just to stay organized. You don't have to do this, but I recommend it. Makes everything a little easier. Okay, now let's make a track for each musician in the band. In this case, we'll just use a guitarist and the lead singer. These are going to be our buses, and I'll color code all of these tracks separately from the first initial 3. Okay, now what we want to do is send each of these initial 3 tracks to each musician individually. And you can do this a bunch of different ways in Reaper. The thing about Reaper is that you can fully customize the skin. So my particular software might look different from yours, but all of these options should still be there. You just got to look for them. So one way to create a send is to open up the routing box on the first track, so the click track. It opens up this window. You go down to sends, and then you choose the track you want to send the audio from that track to. So in this case, we'll send it over to the guitarist. So now the guitarist receives the click. And we'll do that for each of these tracks. We'll send each one to each musician. In Reaper, you can also set it up by receives. So it's basically the same thing, but reversed. So you can click on the routing of the bus track that you want to receive sounds from other tracks, and then you go over to the receives panel. You pull that down and you just basically choose what you want to go into the track. I recommend you set up all of your sends in this case as pre-fader. That way the channel strip's volume won't affect the volume being sent over to the buses. This way there will be less confusion when you're adjusting levels later on. Okay, so when you're all set up, each track should be sending and receiving properly. Each musician should have a receive from the click, cues, and samples, or vice versa. Click should be sending to each musician, cues, and samples, etc. Now we need to configure each bus to send audio out to specific outputs on your interface. To do that, open up the routing settings for one of your buses. Go down to Audio Hardware Outputs and choose the output that you want to set that bus to. I don't have an interface hooked up right now, so I just have 2 outputs, that's stereo left and right. But if you have an interface plugged in, you should see the amount of outputs that interface has. So 4, if you have an interface that has 4 outputs, or 8, or etc. So just choose the one that you want this audio to go out of. Again, setting it as a pre-fader send. So for example, if we set up the singer bus to output 2, then you would run a cable from output 2 of your interface to the input of your singer's in-ear system, and repeat the process for each musician. Now, we don't have a bus for the samples for the house because we can just send that straight out to the mixer. So come over to the samples track, go to the routing settings, and then just choose an output. So then you would run a cable from that output straight to the house or into a DI and then to an XLR that goes to the house mixer. And that does it for the routing. Now with everything set up, we're going to make a marker for each song. So this is the first song. So come over here, add a marker, and name it by song name. Repeat all of the steps for adding tracks. Put each song along those same 3 tracks we set up across the timeline, and then add a marker for each song with the corresponding name. Now, a really nice thing about Reaper is that they support these SWS and S&M extensions. Basically, you download these, and it adds a bunch of actions to the software that don't come natively with it. And these are very useful. Next, I'll show you how I like to automate our backing tracks. I'll select a song in a time selection, go up to Insert, Region from Time Selection. This will make a region to that time selection that you can name, and in the name box, just put the song name. And you don't need song title markers if you use regions. It basically acts as a type of marker anyway. To rename a region, just right-click it and choose Edit Region, and you can name it. I repeat these steps for every song, so I'll have a region for every song. Now let's open up the Actions window. You can do this by default. I think it's Shift ? key. Type in Play Region. And you want to look for this action. Under Regions, it says Go to next region after current region finishes playing. Let's resize this window, make it bigger until you can see the command IDs. And we want to make a note of this ID for this particular action. Every action is associated with an ID, and the IDs can be used in markers to perform that action when the playhead hits that marker. So I'm going to go to the end of this song, still within its region though, and make a new marker. Edit the marker by double-clicking it, and then in the name field, type in exclamation point. This tells the marker that it's an action, and then you're going to put that ID that we saw in the actions list after that exclamation point. You can use as many actions, as far as I know, that you want per marker. So it's always going to be exclamation point, the action ID, space, and if you want another action, exclamation point, the marker ID. And it will read this marker every time the playhead comes around to it and perform that list of actions. So this ID that I entered in for this marker tells the program when the playhead reaches this marker, it's going to go over to the next region. So let's give it a quick test. And it works. Very cool, and the possibilities are pretty much endless. So if you're using an external controller like the air turn, which is what I use, I'll have a 4-pedal air turn pedal, and then I will assign actions to each of those pedals. One of them will be next song, another one will be previous, and that's cycling through regions. So we can freely move around just by hitting that pedal, and I'll have one that's stop, one that's play. You could stack multiple action IDs per marker, so when it gets to the end of a song, you could say, okay, go to the next song and then stop, which is what I do with the band, and then when we're ready to start the song, I'll use my external controller to trigger the next region. That gives us any time we need in between songs. Let me just show you another awesome extension that I love using live. Let's go up to Extensions, go down to Notes. It opens up this S&M Notes box. Remember, you need these extensions downloaded for these options to show up in your software. I'll include a link in the description to this website where you can get these extensions. I highly recommend them. There's a ton of really useful stuff. Right-click in this gray area and choose Dock Notes in Docker. This will lock this window to a specific side of the software. You can move it wherever you want. I like it on the bottom. And click this little lock button on the top left. This locks the window so you can't type anything in it. Then click on Project Notes and change it to marker/region names. And boom, it tells you what song you are currently on. This will change automatically depending on where the playhead is. So if the playhead enters another region, it changes the name. As long as your regions are named accordingly per song, it should just work. Super useful, especially if you're controlling the backing tracks and you're far away from the screen. This helps so much. One final thing I recommend is to get an external MIDI controller with knobs on it, like we use the Launchpad Control XL, I think it is, and just run a long USB cable extension to the front of the stage, and then any musician can adjust their own levels using that. You just assign all the knobs to each bus send to each musician, and then they can just turn the knobs and adjust the sends however they want. This eliminates the need to constantly lean over to a laptop and adjust with a mouse or a trackpad. This just makes things way easier. All right, that does it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. And feel free to subscribe for more future videos. This is Matt Valliere from One Time Mountain, and I'll see you next time.